What's up guys, we got 4 new IEMs today, the YANYIN Canon Pros, the TANCHJIM Bunny, the Zero Ultima, and the Andy Planet. Starting with the YANYIN Pros, these are a very nice, neutral, clean, balanced sounding set. I would even go as far as to say this is a better version of the Pilgrim, the Dusk, those IEMs that try to do a balanced sound, but it fixes the timbre issue on the Dusk, which was a little bit sizzly, and then it's a bit smoother than the Pilgrim while giving you the relatively around the same sound wise. In terms of the technical performance, these are pretty solid. They're around the Pilgrim level, a little bit smoother, separations around the same. I would say it's airier than the Pilgrim. It's not as dynamic as the Pilgrim, but it is smoother overall. You get a little bit more air in the treble. The Canon Pros comes with 3 tuning switches. It goes from like scooped out, kind of thin sounding, like very like I guess clean and borderline clinical. Not my favorite type of sound. And then the on-off configuration has a little bit more bass, a little bit less than the Pilgrim. And finally, with these switches all on, it has around the same bass level as the Pilgrim and around the same as the Dusk, which makes it a very, you know, clean and kind of like bass light in terms of the quantity compared to other sets. But in terms of low end separation, the speed, the attack, and decay, these are very good. The separation is great. Instruments, you can hear them very well. It doesn't get in the way. There's no bleed into the mid-range. It kind of reminds me of the mid-bass presentation on the Pilgrim, but just with smoother upper mids and a little bit more airy when it comes to treble. It does feel pretty spacious, pretty open overall. Now, in terms of pricing, these are the same $400 as the Pilgrim, and since the timbre is a little bit smoother, a little bit more natural, less peaky, I would say they are worth it at retail. They're not a value monster by any means. I would say like around $200. You can get the P50s, the Super Mix 4 if you're looking for an all-rounder. There are a lot of options if you want better value, but if you want just like the last bit of refinement in the treble, then these are a solid option. They do have custom BAs, I think. I'm not sure what BAs, you know, YANYIN is using. I don't hear any peakiness or like unnatural timbre to it. If it's custom, they very well implemented, so you don't have to worry about like, you know, timbre being off. Overall, solid set. However, they are bass light, so again, if your library is hip-hop, R&B, EDM, you want that impact, the slam, like more sub-bass extension, or just like a more thickness to the sound, these would not fit your library very well. If you have indie on the other hand, like ballads, acoustic, slower stuff like bands, even rock, these would work very well. The Canon Pros don't overemphasize the mid-bass, but you get just enough, and it's not scooped out with these switches all on, and it still works pretty nicely for rock and stuff like that. Again, in terms of impact, it's not going to be the most heavy, most authoritative, but overall, if you're looking for like a clean, balanced set, I would recommend these. Although again, not the best value, but still very solid. Now, as for some comparisons, if you're looking to spend $100 more, I would actually just save up and get the IO Volaire. I think the Volaire has, you know, better treble, more airy. It does have ESTs. This is BA. And then versus the original Canons and the Canon 2s, these are a cleaner sound. Those two are much more bassier, much like less, I guess, refined in the treble as the Canon Pros. Again, if you're looking for a bassier sound, I would look for the High 4s, the T Pros, even the OG Canons, the Canon 2s, you know, the Estrella. Those would all be better. They have better low-end presentation, still fairly balanced overall. Whereas this is a very clean, neutral, and just like very like relaxed kind of set. I do like these more than the Dusk. The Dusk does have that, you know, slight sizzle in the treble. It's a little bit brighter leaning than the Canon Pros. These are pretty much just like dead neutral, like very clean, very balanced. If you're looking for more treble, I guess you could go for the Dusk. It does have a little more like that treble energy, and other stuff like the CK2V from Meyer would work as well. Now, vocal wise, I would still go for the Volume S or the EPZ P50 if you want something like that has more body to the vocal, something that scales better. Volume S would be better. On the other hand, if you want something more neutral, something more all-rounded, more cleaner, the P50 from EPZ has just like more clear vocals. And if you want something sweeter in the vocals, the Kineza 4 with the airiness works as well. And then lastly, in terms of scaling, both the Odysseys and the Explorer would be better in that regard. So if you want a cleaner sound, go for the Odysseys. If you want something that's bassier, go for the Explorer. These scale okay, but they do have like more boost when it comes to treble air, so it does hurt the scaling a bit, and it doesn't scale as well as the Odysseys, not as immersive. I personally still like the Odysseys better. They are actually just like a lot cheaper as well. But if you're looking for like a mid-volume set that's just clean, balanced, very detailed, great technical performance, these are a recommendation. Moving on, we have the TANCHJIM Bunny DSP 3.5. These are very hype set and they are very good. I think the hype is justified. very like smooth for around the price point. Both the Bunny DSP 3.5 and the Zero Ultimas, which we'll talk about later, replaces its predecessors, the TANCHJIM 1 as well as the original Zeros. If you already have the 1 DSP or the 3.5 version, you don't really need to buy the Bunny or the Zero Ultimas because they're essentially just a cheaper version of the 1 and a better version of the original Zeros. The overall sound in the 3.5 configuration is bassier. It has a little bit more mid bass. It's slightly warmer, but overall it's still pretty balanced. You get a good amount of airiness to the sound. Pretty smooth for a 1 dynamic driver. Obviously there's like a slight peak, but you know, for the price it's very refined. These kind of remind me of the Origins, but just not as refined and detailed. Obviously the Origins are like 250 bucks, right? But it's like a mini Origin and very solid for the price. Again, very good starter set. The DSP balanced version is more different. It is a little bit cleaner. It doesn't have as much mid bass. I would say the DSP version is a good benchmark for like a clean and very neutral set at around like 20-30 bucks, and technical performance is good. The treble does come out a bit more on the DSP version because there's less mid bass, but overall for a budget dynamic driver set, the treble is very well refined. And really there's no complaints, maybe aside from the fit. I can see the fit being maybe an issue for some people, but you know, tip roll and you're probably gonna be fine. I would say I do like the tuning on the Zenith a bit better. It fits my preferences better. The vocals pop out more. It's still clean. The driver in the Zenith is better overall, but you do get more options on the Bunny with the DSP. And then if you want something warmer, the Clean just does that warmer sound, warm balanced sound better than the 3.5 version. And then obviously if you want something that's like more V-shape, you got the Q5 Pros, and now you also have the Crin Zero Bluetooths if you want a bass headset to like, you know, like a subwoofer set. However, even though I recommend those, I would actually say TANCHJIM outdone themselves with the Zero Ultimas because these are just like a cheaper, equally as good version of the Bunny. Especially with the DSP version, there are just a lot of tuning options in the app. You can play around with the sound preferences. I would say that maybe the treble is slightly peakier than the Bunny, and then the DSP version of the Zero Ultimas is also very similar to the DSP version of the Bunny DSP depending on the preference that you're using. And again, very close when it comes to performance. Now personally, I like the 3.5 version on both the Zero Ultimas and the Bunny better than the DSPs because the extra bit of mid bass does help balance out the, you know, extra little bit of treble. But in terms of technical performance and bang for your buck, the DSP version is the way to go. Now compared to the EW100, which was my original all-rounder recommendation, I would still probably recommend the EW100 if you don't want to mess with the DSP settings, because the DSP stock configuration on the Zero Ultimas does sound a little bit thin, slightly bright when it comes to the treble, because the treble does get emphasized more because there's less low end, right? But if you're willing to EQ, like use the EQ settings, I would definitely take these Zero Ultimas. They're around the same price, but you just have a lot more different tuning options with these Zero Ultimas. And then when it comes to a slightly bassier and warmer sound, I think the QKZ HBB is still solid options. Those are still warmer than the Zero Ultimas. So if you want something warmer, something bassier, those will still be a good option. But if you don't want too much, too much bass, you want that extension, you still want like a little bit of warmness, then the 3.5 version of the Zero Ultimas is very solid. And then when it comes to a vocal focus set, the EW100, the 1Rs, something with a little bit more gain would still work a little bit better than the Zero Ultimas. But again, if you get the SP, you do have the options to mess around with the EQ settings. And when it comes to the treble and like just airiness detail, the Zero Ultimas in the balanced DSP version is probably the best when it comes to just overall just technical detail under like 20 bucks. And then for bass heads, the Ross Finch will still be the better fit. It just has a lot more bass. It's less, I guess, like focus on the other spectrum. It just like focuses on the low end with the Ross Finch. And if you want something that is more like V-shape, you got the KZ EDC Pros. These aren't necessarily a V-shape sound. This is more like clean balance to like slightly warm depending on if you get the DSP or the 3.5. So the Zero Ultima is a blind recommendation when it comes to the 3.5 and the DSP. Solid sets for both of them, but I think TANCHJIM kind of shot themselves in the foot with these Zero Ultimas because these are just like value bangers. So these make this look a bit worse even though the bunnies are still like very good. Alright, sorry, my camera died, but moving on, lastly, we have the planets, and these are basically an all-rounder slight V-shaped sound. It's pretty dynamic, very contrasty, pretty fun and engaging in the overall playback. I would say the bass texture is its main selling point. It has a beryllium DD. You get the impact while getting pretty good separation on top. This actually reminds me of the KZ EDC Pro in the sound, with less treble extension and not as smooth. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I would actually get the EDC Pros over the Planets because of the smoother treble and better extension, even though it is KZ. Now the Planets are slightly better when it comes to the bass attack, the separation, and the texture is like slightly better, but I don't think the marginally better low end is worth the trade-off. I would rather get the refinement in the treble and the better extension on the EDC Pros over like marginally better, you know, like low end on the Planets. Now this doesn't mean the Planets are a bad set. I would still recommend them if you don't want to support KZ. Still a very solid, you know, slight V shape all rounder kind of sound, but you know, the EDC Pro exists for $5, so that's the main issue. Now versus the Zero Ultimas, the Planet is definitely a different type of sound. It's more V-shaped, it's less refined when it comes to the treble presentation, it's less clean, it's I guess quote unquote less balanced overall. And if you want a cleaner, more technical sound, the Zero Ultimas will still be the better choice, whereas this is just like a more fun kind of like slight V-shaped sound. These aren't a bass head set like the Rosfinch or very warm and thick like the QKZ HBBs, and they kind of remind me of a less bassy version of the Blonde 03s. I would take these over the original Blonde 03s and the Blonde 03s Mark IIs. The timbre on the Blondes are just a little bit like metallic, not as natural as the Planet, and the drivers are slightly better on the Planets. Technical performance wise, these do okay for $20. They're not as good as the Zero Ultimas, but overall, like, you're not expecting crazy, you know, detail resolution at this price anyways. The Zero Ultimas are kind of like an anomaly in that regards. So overall, I would still recommend these if you don't want to support KZ because, you know, it's KZ. But if you're willing to, you know, buy a KZ IEM, I think the EDC Pros are the better value and the better tuned set when it comes to the treble. But overall, still a decent set. It's just that the competition is just too crazy right now. If these came out like 2 years ago, this would be like a market banger, like a legendary, you know, budget set. But yeah, that's it for now. I hope you guys found this video helpful. Great releases all around. I do have the meta coming up next, so stay tuned for that. But as for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see everyone in the next one. Shout out to Dom Q, Rarix Cat, Mystic Spoon Attack, B Yurak, Discal Scaldus, Walker Standard, Patrick, User, Mr. Gorillas, Polly J, Anton Risto, Gis Seng Young, Christopher Jackson, Name, Henry Claudia, Son of a Horse, Obi, Wizard, Frickalicious, Tapas Art, Contain Guava Juice Gains, Xuan Bak Le, Forever New, Chuckle Norris, FKSRG, Oh Really, AMC4, Treble Well Extended, and 777ZK. Thank you guys so much.